Welcome back to the Young Writers Vlog. I'm Tyler, and I'm here to continue my talk about how to write characters. Today we're going to be talking about physicality, how characters look and how they move, and how you can use those features to show the audience what those characters are like. This will of course bleed into how to write good scenes in general, because physicality is important to all aspects of writing, not just characters. First off, learning how to properly describe characters is a skill you will always need, because our first impressions of people, both in reality and in fictions, are based very heavily on the way that they look. But when you're learning how to describe characters, the big question to ask is what you're describing about them. There are no hard rules on how to describe a character well. It's about making sure that it matches the tone of your work and the setting and the situation in which they're introduced. More important are the kind of things that you should and should not be describing to your readers. To put it simply, nobody cares about your character's eye colors. Unless it's specifically important to the plot to know that this character has eyes of this color, it is completely worthless information to us. Harry Potter is a good example here because even though we constantly hear about Harry's eyes, it's always characters telling them that he has his mother's eyes. This is a way to signify that Harry is known more by his parents and his lineage than by anything that he does specifically, especially in the early books. This is a unique part of his character. It's something that makes him stand out, which is why it's constantly brought up. This is key when you're thinking about what physical aspects of your character to describe. You don't want to describe the most average and normal parts of them. You want to describe the things that stand out. The things that make your character unique are the things that you should be telling your reader. No matter what you're talking about, you should always be talking about what makes your characters unique, not what makes them average. I've talked about this a bit before, that when a new character enters a room, you don't have to tell the audience that they're wearing pants. They will assume that the character has clothes on, and if you bring attention to the fact that this character has pants, we're gonna think something's up with the character's pants. And so when you skip the boring and mundane aspects of your character, not only are you saving time with your descriptions, you're also making sure that your audience is cluing into the fact that this is what makes them unique, this is what makes them important. Second, try not to fall into the trap of thinking that your character's physical appearance doesn't matter, only their thoughts and their inner worlds matters. The fact is, your character's inner worlds should affect the way that they act, the way that they move, the way they dress, where they stand when they enter a room. It's important to remember that when you're physically describing characters, you're not just talking about how attractive their face is or what kind of shape their body has. You're talking about the way that they move their arms when they talk, the way that their eyes dart around the room when they're panicked. You're talking about the way that they shuffle their feet when they walk into a room. A character's physical appearance is not a static attribute that they have. It's a living expression of who they are as a person. And you shouldn't miss an opportunity to develop characters by describing what they're doing, how they're acting. In essence, this is an extension of show, don't tell. When you're writing, it's not a good idea to tell the reader everything that's going on in every character's heads. The better way to express to the audience what is in characters' heads is to show how they act when they're doing what they're doing. If a character is lying, don't just say they're lying. Mention that they break eye contact and then say a thing. Give the readers clues into your character's inner worlds. Don't outright tell them what's going on. And this focus on physically what is happening should drive all aspects of your writing, especially when you're creating scenes. Take a note of this excerpt from The Picture of Dorian Gray. The girl grew white and trembled. She clenched her hands together and her voice seemed to catch in her throat. "You're not serious, Dorian," she murmured. "You are acting." "Acting? I leave that to you. You do it so well," he answered bitterly. She rose from her knees and, with a piteous expression of pain in her face, she came across the room to him. She put her hand upon his arm and looked into his eyes. He thrust her back. "Don't touch me," he cried. A low moan broke from her, and she flung herself at his feet and lay there like a trampled flower. "Dorian, Dorian, don't leave me," she whispered. Conversations are more than just people standing face to face saying things back and forth. People move, they have actions, they do things as they talk. And focusing on that is so important, not just for expressing character, but creating good and memorable scenes. The most boring scenes are ones that are just string after string of characters monologuing, saying this and saying that and saying this, and it starts to read more like a court transcription than an actual work of fiction. Whenever you have characters interacting with each other, you should always be keeping in mind the physical reality of that conversation, how they're saying, what they're doing as they talk, and how physically they react to what's being said. Finally, the third way to improve your character descriptions is not to front load them. It can be very tempting to, the very first time a character enters a scene, to give 3 paragraphs describing how they dress, the way they look, the way they walk and talk, and make sure that the reader knows everything about them the moment they appear. But you don't really have to do that. often the best way to introduce characters, especially if they're not the main character in your novel, is to introduce them by a simple and easy to recognize physical characteristic. The guy with the beard walked over, the lady carrying a stack of books left the building. These descriptions are vivid enough that we get an idea of what that character looks like, and you can give us small descriptions about what they look like as time passes. Later on, you can have that character brush their hair out of their eyes, anxiously fiddle with their gold necklace. Now, giving these small tidbits is good because it accomplishes two things. It avoids the expositional dump that can happen when a character introduces and everything stops so that the author can give you a couple paragraphs about this character's life story. And that can get really dull if that happens more than once or twice in a novel. The second benefit is that you can mention it when it becomes relevant so that the audience knows that that's a thing they should pay attention to. If you include an important piece of information surrounded by 3 paragraphs of relatively unimportant information, there's a good chance your reader's going to miss it. But if it's standing on its own, mentioned in halfway through a conversation or halfway through a scene, the reader's going to pick up on that. The reader's going to pick up on the fact that you gave them new information, and they're going to recognize that. And so if you have really important things about a character you want your audience to notice, don't lose it amongst a wave of unnecessary tidbits that your audience doesn't need to remember. So thank you for joining me on this episode of the Young Writers Vlog. Tune in next time where I'll develop in more detail how to write good conversations and how to develop a character's speaking patterns. Until then, have a good night and keep on writing. And really, I would have gave the best advice I have. Don't forget about the physical world. If you remember that, you will write good conversations basically all the time.